a sexual orientation, uh, disability, a gender identity or expression, any kind of bias with that crime becomes a hate crime. This is a hard thing sometimes to wrap around your head when it seems like, well, there's got to be some sort of bias, but police maybe aren't looking at it, or you feel it's not being taken seriously. We've seen this a lot with the Asian community. Sometimes it'll be an obvious hate crime because somebody will say something and make it easy for an investigator to say it's a hate crime. Other times it's kind of ambiguous. And is it really a hate crime targeting one group, or is it a crime that's of opportunity? Someone sees an easy mark and wants to rob that person. Because to fulfill the hate crime definition as an investigator, we have to find that bias. If it's not out there, we can't even make an argument. Let's say, hey, out of 100 people, only members of one group were targeted. So we can kind of say, yeah, there's a bias against that group. If it's hard for us to make that claim, we can't say it's a hate crime. It doesn't mean that the underlying crime wouldn't be looked at. But sometimes, in talking to communities, it's hard for them to understand that. And I understand the suffering these groups are going under. And I know just from talking to the Asian Americans in the US, I mean, in the FBI, who've experienced this themselves or through their families. And they've said, the crimes against Asian Americans have been here for years. Nobody's really talked about it. And one of the things we're going to learn about today is the talking and the reporting is vital, because if we don't know what's going on, if law enforcement's not hearing it, sometimes we can't respond correctly and add those resources. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is constantly erring on the side of reporting and letting law enforcement get involved and cooperating as much as you can as a victim with law enforcement, so that we can bring whoever did this to justice. Hate crimes are the #1 priority in the FBI Civil Rights Program. I am the Civil Rights Program Coordinator. I have to manage not just my squad, but other squads located throughout the New York area, whether on Long Island or in the Hudson Valley or in White Plains, and kind of make sure that they're looking at these cases seriously and assessing them as best as they can. I know this group is made up of kind of between New York and the Washington, D.C. metro area. From the FBI, we're a national organization, but we have to work locally, and every state is different. One of the challenges that we in the FBI deal with in New York, is just the way it is actually New York has very robust state hate crime laws. And they also have a very strong double jeopardy clause in the New York Constitution. And what that means, we're not getting too into the legal weeds, is that in New York, we want to make sure that the local police take the first swing at the case before we get involved. The reason being, if we go in and we don't have a lot of crimes regarding simple, I don't want to say simple, but tend to be more local crimes like assault or vandalism or even murder that doesn't have a federal nexus. If the feds come in with a hate crime case and we lose, then we can't even, in New York State, prosecute the person for the underlying murder, assault, or vandalism, or whatever it is. So we want to make sure that locally we use everything we can first, and then if the interests of justice are not served, then the FBI and the federal government will come in and try to take that case federally to make sure that the interests of justice is served. This is easier said than done, and I know it frustrates a lot of victims. We had, without getting into the weeds of cases, incidents in different parts of the country where it seemed certain people were targeted, and there's always an immediate request for a federal investigation. And I understand that, because in a lot of people's minds, a federal investigation sort of supersedes a local investigation. It's not the way we really look at it. We want to use the best tools possible to make the community safer. So here in New York, I work very closely with the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force to make sure that nothing is falling through the cracks, to see places where we can work together. work with other local law enforcement. And if I am not looking to take a charge federally, I have a lot of resources to help my local counterparts with computer forensic abilities, cell phone tracking abilities, anything technological that maybe a smaller department doesn't have and doesn't have the resources to get quickly. We develop these partnerships to work together. We always keep in mind the victims, and we always want to make sure that the victims in the community, whatever charges eventually get uh, taken through the legal process, that the victims are taken care of. So we have a lot of victim resources available, both at the state and federal levels. And I always encourage communities to make sure that they know about these things and to always report whatever you may think is worthy of reporting. Not every hate incident is a hate crime. Unfortunately, you go online, there's a lot of hate speech there, but people are generally free to make hateful comments as long as they're not making what we call a true threat. That is a serious intention of putting fear into people that they're going to be harmed. But we don't want people to be their own lawyer or to be their own advocate. I only bring that up because to give people a better context of what we're looking at. But I want people to report because we had a case in just recently on Long Island. A man had been sending for almost 10 years threats against the LGBTQ communities throughout the New York area. Not every one of his communications were true threats that would rise to a criminal case, but we were able to get very good evidence through the non-threatening communications to link him up to the threatening communications. And it was only because people had saved some of that evidence and we were able to review it and analyze it that we could put the case together. So I always tell people, if you have a house of worship you're associated with or a community, make a little threat file. If you're getting this stuff, don't discard things, don't delete emails. If you're concerned, send it on to law enforcement. It helps us look at a bigger picture. Just want to give you a quick sense of, at least in New York, what the stats look like. The NYPD has a very good statistical tracking system to show what some of these threats are looking like. As you can see here, in the New York City area, at least, anti-Jewish hate crimes are the largest area for hate crimes. And that's because, there's a large and significant Jewish population in New York, and there are a lot of Jewish houses of worship as well. So that covers everything from, swastikas drawn on synagogues to assaults, and the various degrees of assaults, and even criminal harassment. You can notice that the Asian, anti-Asian hate crimes looks like a close second. That's something that's been in the news for a long time. It's something we've been very worried about for a long time. And we are trying to increase our outreach to the Asian community because some of the things we've heard for is that this has been going on. Like I said, it's been going on for a long time, just not reported. The Asian community, that's sort of a quick way for us to refer to it, but it's a large community and it's made up of different ethnic blocks. And sometimes just the shorthand for us is not meant to be insulting to those people. Sometimes it comes across that way, so I apologize. But even among a large group like Chinese Americans, there are very different groups of Chinese Americans. There's Japanese, there's Koreans, and there's Vietnamese, and sometimes it just sort of lumped together by the perpetrators, and sometimes, quite frankly, unfortunately, by the people investigating it. So we got to do a better job of kind of understanding the differences and nuances, and we're working to make that, do that a little bit better, of the understanding. So I encourage you, you can just Google this, NYPD hate crimes stats. probably is due for an update very shortly. And you can actually play around with it if you're that statistical type of person, just to get a better sense of maybe how things are affecting your organization if you live in New York, or the types of organizations that are affected in New York, and you want to see how it affects, maybe to anticipate some of the things that may be happening in a different part of the country. As far as the FBI, we're into stats too, but unfortunately we're so large and have to get everybody's throughout the country stats to compile it. We're always about a year and a half behind. So like in October, we updated our 2020 stats, and it's already 2022. But as you can see here, race and ethnic ancestry hate crimes make up well over half of the hate crimes that we're looking at, 61, almost 62%. So we know that there's a problem out there, and what are we doing about it? Like I said, we're working very closely with our local partners to make sure that we are we are sharing information, sharing intelligence as best we can, and seeing what we can do to fill in the gaps. In New York City, a lot of this is driven, unfortunately, by, I don't want to blame the homeless or drug addiction, but it's really society's inability, quite frankly, to deal with this situation that is driving a lot of this. It's very frustrating sometimes. We've had cases, whether it was the Muncie stabbing in upstate New York, where 5 people were stabbed at a Jewish school. One died a few weeks later of his wounds. That person was severely mentally ill and was deemed unfit for trial. We've had other cases where we've arrested people for hate crimes, and they were either deemed unfit for trial or sent for psychiatric counseling. And hopefully they're going to get their needs met, so they're not perpetrating these crimes. It's a real problem. It's something that I think is exacerbated by COVID. I think we're going to see a lot more of the mental illness problems, unfortunately. So, that's an issue, and it's a tough issue for law enforcement because we don't always, what we think of in traditional ways of trying to mitigate a crime or deter a crime doesn't always work. So, if you put a police car outside, most of the time, if you are a criminal with half a brain, you're not going to do a crime in front of a police car. In some of these cases in New York, you've had people attack several Asian women, and then they see a police car and they start jumping up on the police car as well. So, you would hope that would be a deterrent, but if you have this certain type of mental illness, plus you have a bias or you have a conspiracy mindset, which unfortunately, a lot of mentally ill people do, and you marry up together with conspiracies about who's spreading COVID or who's ruling the world, you have a problem. What we don't.
Hey, Chris, I apologize to interrupt you, and I know that this issue is so critical that I think all of us here could probably speak for 2 hours apiece on this, but I do want to make sure that we give some time to the other folks here that are with us today as well. So
thank you.
Thank you for sharing some of those stats and some of those reports. We're going to roll right into our next panelist. We have 3 different community representatives with us today on top of FBI folks. And each of those 3 folks are going to answer the same double set of questions, which is, what have you seen in terms of threats from your community in the past year or 2? And what are you doing about it that's actually helping as best as you can tell? So our first friend to speak to those issues is Ms. Ramona Carroll. Ramona believes that everyone's voice matters in building strong communities. She has served the residents of Fairfax County, Virginia for more than 20 years in a variety of capacities, including social worker, community developer, and interfaith coordinator. So Ramona, if you could share your thoughts with us about what are you seeing in your community that affects hate crimes, and what are you doing about it, you writ large, that seems to be effective? I turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be with you all today. as I thought about this question, there are two incidences that are national that came to mind. And one is the Ahmaud Arbery case, as well as the recent bomb threats to historically Black colleges and universities. And I think that these two, I'm using these two examples because of what they represent specifically to the African American community. And when we think about, I think the term has been used in media about the kind of the lynching, the public lynching of Ahmaud Arbery, and the concern of how he was described by the gentlemen that were convicted for his murder. Those terms, that feeling of Black life and the value of Black life and what that means to the Black and African American community are things that ring true regardless of where you are in the country. And then to have earlier this year, the bomb threats to our historically HBCUs, our historical Black and colleges and universities, and understanding what that does to not only the students who were there, but their parents who send them there, and those places being safe sanctuaries for many of our community members. So what we try to do, what I try to do in my role in Fairfax County, is to bring people together to make sure that we're not leaving off the table the issue of racial and or ethnic hate crimes, and that there is a safe space for specifically Black and African American community members and other people of color in other communities who have been marginalized or maybe don't feel as though their crimes are being reported, or maybe they're not reporting their crimes enough because of mistrust or past relationships with either federal law enforcement or local law enforcement, but giving them an opportunity in this space to express what they're seeing, to have appropriate knowledge and understanding of what is a hate crime and how they can raise their concerns to the powers that be. So that would be some of what I've been seeing over the past 2 years, and also what we have done to lessen that, and just general education around what is a hate crime and who can report that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona. And wow, there's so much to unpack there, right? So we will get to the unpacking portion, but I do want to introduce our other two panelists that are with us as well today to give them the same opportunity to talk to the same two themes. So the next panelist that's going to share her insights with you is Reverend Carmen Hernandez, who has served as an advocate and an activist in the Bronx for the past 40 years. She is a pastor, a business leader, and a tireless cheerleader for the Hispanic community. Carmen, I turn the virtual microphone over to you for your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I myself been a victim of bully and hate crime, and it's very difficult when it's happening in your own community, when it's happening to you where you live without even not even knowing you, how people could transform hate and do things to really hurt you, to really really I mean, it was real bad that they even tried to even get me out of my own apartment eviction just because I'm a tenant president fighting the rights of our community. So the thing is, just don't let it get to you. I think my faith has been the most stronger that really has helped me come back these difficult situation, because it's happening to you. So what you do, you use the resources, your partnership with your housing police, because I live on NYCHA development. When you have NYCHA employees bullying you and do hateful crime, I was broke in 4 times. They robbed me in my community room, and it's not the same again, because it's really it's been reported in News 12. I mean, it's really been out there what has happened to me, and they even said that I was racist to NYCHA. I mean, stuff that is not even true, forced, defamation character. So how can you fight all these stuff and to see that you're still standing and they still bugging out? It's been 10 years and they have not been successful. Whatever they wanted to do just to hurt me or get me out as a president, tenant president, one in NYCHA development where I live. So they even said it, why even my gender, why this lesbian is the president, so I was target LGBT hate crime. So the thing is, use all the resources, housing police, get people involved and do the right thing, report it. I report everything incident that has happened, and this is the problem with Latino community. They do not report what's happening into them if something happened. And we need to really find, the tools and to use it. We cannot be silenced no more. Latino needs to wake up and report the hate crime and the mistreatment that they get being bullied, being who they are, what they are, and where they live. So it's very difficult time. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Wow, there was a lot there as well. Woo, more to come when we dive into some other questions. But first, I want to offer to Chris Kwok the same opportunity to speak to what's the threat landscape look like and kind of what are you seeing that might be effective strategies to mitigate some of the levels of hate. Chris is a mediator, an adjunct assistant professor, and a community organizer who has been active in speaking about anti-Asian violence and harassment. He's an adjunct faculty in Asian American Studies at City University, New York, Hunter. So Chris K, over to you for your initial thoughts, sir.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you all. The Asian American community, as Special Agent Chris Donahue has said, is diverse and has faced, hate crimes over the entire length of its visible presence in America, which is over 150 years, 200 years. In our recent era, the South Asians in our Asian American community faced a tremendous amount of discrimination post 9/11, being blamed for being Muslim. Some South Asians are Muslims, some South Asians are not, but because they appeared to be Middle Eastern or Muslim in origin for a decade, they faced very strong, sort of being blamed for 9/11 and sort of those things. East Asians, people who are Chinese, Japanese, Korean, did not really face that post 9/11. With COVID-19, that changed. The focus really shifted to East Asians and people thought to look like Chinese. And those incidents go from very violent, which we've all seen in the news because those tend to make the news, to just verbal and physical harassment. Spitting is a large part. Many Asian Americans experience being spat upon, and then told to go back to China or you bought COVID. And in the age of COVID, that's actually fairly dangerous. And then also there's just a tremendous amount of harassment where people or shunning, cabs don't pick you up or things of that nature. So those are the full spectrum of things that people in the Asian American community are facing. And, the Asian American community was told to report. And really through 2020 and beginning in 2021, it did report. It reported in much larger numbers than it ever had. But what we found was that it was really difficult once the reporting came through for these incidents to be processed through the policing and the law enforcement, the district attorneys, the prosecution. In large part because Asian Americans have not been a part of the political process and the legal process. Hate crime laws have not developed to really deal with how incidents and crimes, I think, occur against Asian Americans, which are related to how they happen against African Americans and Jewish groups. So they're related to those anti-Semitism, anti-Blackness, but they're different. So that's one of the things that we're sort of figuring out as we go along. And that's some of the ways that the Asian American community has been responding. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to invite now Chris K and Christy and Ramona and Carmen to come back to video. And I have a series of questions, and these questions come from you, the people who registered to join us today. So these are questions that you said that you were interested in hearing about. Remember, if you have questions that come to your mind, you're welcome to type them into the chat box anytime, or comments, or if you have a question that you'd like to verbalize, you're welcome to raise your hand too. So we'll alternate between the questions submitted prior to today and the questions that are coming in here as we're talking today. So Chris K, first question is going to come right back to you, sir. And that question comes from someone who registered to join us. How do I recognize a hate crime when it happens? How do I know if I'm the victim of a hate crime?
Well, the definition in New York State is that there has to be an underlying crime, and then someone has chosen you to perpetrate that crime because of, and then the New York State Penal Code, says because what are the protected categories? It is race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender, religion, religious practice, age, disability, or sexual orientation, regardless whether or not that perception is correct. So a lot of people think that you do have to have a verbal, part of that, and that's not exactly true. There are other types of evidence that could be used if the police, if the prosecutors are aggressive enough to pull those things together. So, just state it as it is. Try to collect information. If you're spat upon, which happened often to Asian Americans in this, collect it. Physical evidence is important. Video is important. Quite honestly, because for Asian Americans, many of these incidents have occurred without a thing being said. And that's an interesting sort of part of this particular anti-Asian wave that we're in. So.
Thank you for that, Chris. And that leads right into the next question that also comes from someone who registered to join us today. This one's for Chris D. So Chris D, Chris K was just talking about report when something happens. How do we encourage, or how would you encourage someone to report a potential hate crime?
Obviously, if you're in imminent danger, you call 911, or you get somebody to call. If you're witnessing it, you call 911. So like a mugging or something like that, you call the local police right away. The FBI is sort of like a few, we're a distance away, unfortunately, in a lot of these ways. We're not local responders. So if you're in imminent danger, you call 911. You see what the police response is. If for some reason you think you're not getting traction, or maybe this is something that's happened a while back, and maybe it's, I hate to use the word stale, but not as current, and you want to talk to somebody about it, you can contact the FBI. We will always take your call. What we find is, a lot of people are afraid to come to law enforcement because their community maybe hasn't had the best relationship. When you have community organizations, or whether it's on the national level, the local level, whether it's ADL, the NAACP, or the Asian American Pacific Islander Foundation, whatever, because we're trying to build trust relationships, they can be a very good mediator between the victim and coming to law enforcement. So if someone, maybe someone in the Asian American community is uncertain about what happened, they can go to Chris Kwok, and Chris Kwok can say, you know what, I have somebody to talk to, Chris Donahue. I've been on a panel with him. He'll listen to you. And so by creating those partnerships, we want that information to flow. So we always are on the side of reporting.
I totally agree. And that I was going to do that anyway. So thank you, Chris. And, Ebony, as I put in, has created a whole program where lawyers can not necessarily represent you, but because we have experience, because we know Chris Donahue, we know his email, because we have relationships with district attorneys, we can advocate for you. We can come into the office. And the thing is, if you're a regular person and you haven't interacted with these things, hopefully you haven't, and you don't need to, we have. So we can go in there and be like, can we advocate? Can we do this? Can you look at that? And we can do that in a sensitive way. We can do it in a cooperative way. And we can do that in a way that represents a community, but not necessarily as a lawyer. So you really just have to be engaged to know that that's a possibility.
Great points, both of you. And that leads right into the next question. And Carmen, this one is coming to you for some thoughts. So Chris K, you both talked about reporting. You're also talking about trust, right? And relationships, getting to know each other. So HACCEN, which is hosting today's webinar, is about trust and networking and building connections. Carmen, could you speak for a little bit about how HACCEN could be helpful as we build connections with each other to mitigate hate crimes?
Yeah, that's very important. The fact that, because exactly what Chris and Christopher said, a relationship is very important, how you build relationship and partnership. And that's what I'm here. And I thank, because of a mentor of mine who told me and submitted my name to be part of this organization agency. And I am very honored to be, and hopefully that I can help my community, especially Latino community, that do not speak up. And also we have Asians in our community that have businesses. So I'm here for everyone, whether you're Asian, whether you're Latino, a different background, or, LGBT, which is a big factor here in the Bronx. I'm fighting for our LGBT community. That is something that is very to my heart. So yes, partnership is very important, and HACCEN is the best organization than anybody. I suggest everyone that to be involved and get involved, so that way we could build our community a better community society. And we need to start caring for one another, and HACCEN is the right key to do so. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Carmen. I hope that everyone is getting the message that none of us can do this individually. We're all in it together, right? The only way that we attack this problem effectively is to do it jointly with each other. Ramona, I'm going to back things up now to kind of bigger picture questions that I'm going to turn over to you. And these, again, come from folks who registered to join us today. Many folks asked, how do we prevent hate crimes? How do we combat hate crimes kind of overall? And several folks had also specifically said, how do we stop hate violence against people of color? So can you share your thoughts on those topics?
Right, and those are very big questions to unpack, and I'm grateful that someone asked those. I think when we think about just overall, it's getting to know people. I think, someone mentioned bias, and we all have biases, or maybe we grow up in communities where we haven't been around people who haven't looked like us, who don't worship like us, or who love differently than how we love. And not having that experience and getting to know people for who they are and valuing their humanity. And so there's a whole thing around seeing the humanity in others. We have done some work in Fairfax County around that through like interfaith councils and bringing people together specifically around hate and bias crimes. And then also helping people to build those networks and those touch points to lessen whatever barriers or preconceived ideas around another population that they may have. I just wanted to kind of talk through how racism plays a part in this, and how for each of us, when specifically speaking to specifically people of color, specifically African Americans, there is a unique history that the African American community has in this country. And so we have issues around like individual racism, and that can be prejudgment or bias, discrimination by an individual based on the race, the color of someone's skin. Then there's institutional racism, when we see things come into policies and practices that produce better outcomes for certain populations, and intentionally lessen those outcomes, specifically for the Black community, which has been part of our history here. And then there's structural racism, which is history and current reality of institutional racism across all institutions, combining to create a system that negatively impacts communities of color. And that's taken from the the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, where those definitions were given. But I think those 3 levels of bias and racism play into how we see hate crimes manifest specifically for Black communities, communities of colors, or LGBTQ community. If there is specifically with the Black community, the African American community, there is this tie to our policies, to the way we govern, the way we live, that is just inherent now. And I think that part of the challenge for the Black community is that there seems to be a lull, maybe sometimes, where this is just acceptable behavior, and not knowing who to call, or not trusting different institutions because there hasn't been the type of response or the type of support or acknowledgement or the believing of the story. So I would say things that are important are to get to know people who are outside of your community, make meaningful connections, believe people when they tell you that they're experiencing a hate and bias crime, believe people when they tell you that your language is offensive and may not be comfortable for them. Talk to your family members and your community members when they are saying things that are racist and biased and hateful towards people. We know that language, that Agent Donahue, if I'm saying this wrong, please correct me if not, but that there is a space for language, but language and a crime may be 2 different things. But if you're sitting around a group of friends and they're saying things about a particular culture, about a community, you have a right to say something and to stop that and to educate people that is hateful and that is biased language, and you don't want to be around or associate yourself with those types of people. And just education, I think so. Education in our own communities, in our own families, and then making sure that we are believing people when they say that they've experienced a hate and bias crime, supporting them when they want to report it, and then also as we continue to build trust with our law enforcement, specifically with the African American community, so that there can be reportings and knowing that those reportings will be followed up on. Thank you.
That was a lot, and wow, tons of words of wisdom there. I'm going to kind of jump on part of what you specifically mentioned, Ramona, and toss a question to Chris K. And this is talking, and Chris, you kind of talked about this too in your opening remarks. one of our registrants had asked, how do I persuade a racist person that they're wrong about me, right? So in the moment, and Ramona, you touched on this too, speaking up when the language becomes offensive and standing up for people like you and people who are not like you as well. So Chris K, I wonder if you have thoughts about, in the moment, or if you know someone might have an anti-Asian bias, how do you combat that? How do you stop that?
Yeah, I really don't think there's a good answer, to that. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything, in the moment, in the heat of a moment, to have these kind of dialogues that we're having now, and that the answers for those are very long term, or medium term at best. And in the immediate, I would say, get people walking around to stop and to perhaps help you and to have eyes on what's happening so that your safety can be increased. I think that's an important part of that. But I like some of the comments have said, education and the discussion about our history, an honest discussion about our history, is, I think, the best way long term to deal with these issues, so that we can come together, we can build upon what is acceptable and what is not, and about how to sort of because our history is really not been taught properly, we don't understand it, and so we are surprised. But if you knew the history, I think in a way you would not be surprised. We shouldn't be surprised as to what's happening, because let's say, particularly with an anti-Asian wave, it comes in waves, it comes and goes, and there's different times where it's hot and there's different times when it's cold. Right now we're in a hot situation, and like Ramona has said, it overlaps with anti-Blackness and anti-Semitism, but it's also different. So, and that's a complex reality that we don't often sort of learn within our formal education system. So.
Thank you for that. And I'm noticing too some comments that folks are throwing in the chat box, supporting these kind of big notions of networks and standing up for each other and changing the culture in our country from being a silent bystander to being an active ally, which I think is critical, right? There's things that all of us can do to make things just a little bit better. Carmen, I want to toss something to you in light of all of the years that you have spent working on issues that are in the Bronx. One of our attendees asked, should we petition city or state government about hate programs or hate activities or something to help? If we should, what should we ask for? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. We should be, because it's really a big factor here in New York City. As you see in the news about the hate crime, we definitely would ask them, and especially attach it to the mental health, because that's a big factor as well. This is what I did here in my development. I started, like what we spoke about, resources and partnership. We partnered with Thrive New York, with the First Lady, and we started having mental health workshop here in my development. And it was real great to have tenants to come down, and education, because that is the #1 key, is to educate the community how we could do it. And so I found the remedy to bring all these resources to our development. And that way, one by one, if I could get one tenant, then I done my job to educate and empower them about hate and mental health issue. I think if we attach them together, then we could really solve the really problems that we are having in our community.
Thank you for that. We have not a ton of time left, but we have enough time, I think, to get just to at least a couple of more questions. This one, Ramona, is going to come over to you. And this was a question that came to us multiple times in different ways by different people who registered to join us today. What can we do for folks who have experienced hate crimes or related trauma? How do we support them, counsel them? What can we do?
First, believe them, and find out what their needs are. I think that there are, when we're moved to do good or to help people, sometimes we're not helping in the space in which we are maybe prepared to help. So when I hear the word counsel, you're not providing counseling, but you want to support, whether it's a friend or coworker or a neighbor or a community member, and figure out, I think it's been mentioned in the chat several times, to move from a silent bystander to really being an ally, and figure out how you can use your voice. But also, know what resources are available for trauma, and if there are groups that really support people who have a history of racial trauma, if there are support groups in the community, if there are affinity groups that people can go to, like knowing what resources are available in your community and being able to direct people to those resources. Again, if it's someone that you know personally, how do you stand up? How are you an ally and figuring out what you can do for that person real time that's not going to bring additional harm, but directing them to the resources that are appropriate for them.
That makes a lot of sense. We have someone here in the audience who asked a related question, and panelists, I'm not sure which of you would have the best ideas for how to answer this. So this is up to anyone on the panel, and it is related to college students. If you're a student at a college and your college hasn't done much to help students who are experiencing hate crimes or harassment, is there something specific and direct that a university student could ask their university to do? And Carmen, I see, yes, ma'am, your hand's up. Go right ahead.
Yeah, this is my heart. This is where I come in as a youth committee pastor. I think when you are in college, I think you should start a program, partner with HACCEN. I think that's number one key. And HACCEN can help you how to establish a group, do your own group and start doing like everybody else have, like they have an LGBT department. Partner with HACCEN to help you and guide you and give you the tools to make sure that we can bring those messages about hate crime and bully and those against each other, which is supposed to be stopping. And that's number one key, especially the school. Young people don't have the tools that they need to accept one another's culture. Because I had one of my godson was bullied in the school, and we had to transfer him to another school because they even threatened his life because he's Christian. So, you know, this is something that we need to educate and bring it to the schools, how to do your own, you know. I think HACCEN should be on all schools. I think this is a great tool, again, to bring it to our college, bring it to our school, public and junior high and high school, all the way to college, because this happens bully even at the young age. You have young little boys taking their life because they don't know how to handle when somebody, you know, bully them. Or hate crime because they just don't like you, period. There's people that hate you for no reason. So I advise the college student to partner with us here in HACCEN, and we can help you in the tools. I'm at your service as well, and can help you how to do a group, you know, start a group peer, so that way you could teach your colleagues about hate crime and bully.
Thank you for that helpful recommendation. Great. There's always more to say, and there's never enough time. I will say, if you are not already a member of HACCEN and you found this to be interesting and useful, consider joining us. These are the kinds of things that we like to talk about as the group to find ways going forward. Oh, Christy, looks like you had a comment too that you wanted to throw in about the university front. So real quick, I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, most universities have a police department or some sort of public safety officer. You know, again, report that immediately to whatever campus safety or police department covers your school, like everywhere, and make sure that it's out, you know, that it's, you know, it's a report. And if you could probably ask for a copy, you know, most places you can get a copy of the police report after it's filed. And so just make sure you're doing that. And then if you're not getting traction, then you can either call us or take it to the next level.
Thank you for that. And now, woo, we're really bumping up on our time. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give just their final thought. If you could encapsulate one key thing that you really would like folks to take away from our very rich conversation today, what would that one thing be? And Christy, I'm going to come right back to you, Christy, to say, what's your final thought that you would like to leave with everyone here today?
Report, and build bridges to other organizations and people.
Love it. And wow, that was like 10 seconds. Woo. Thank you for that. Ramona, you're up next, Ramona. What's the one thought that you would like to leave with everyone?
I'm going to piggyback Chris, and I'm going to say report, but also build those relationships and hold people accountable when you hear them making comments that are inappropriate.
Beautiful. Great comments. Carmen, you're next. What's the one thing you want folks to take away from today's conversation, Carmen?
And even if you didn't finish school and you feel that you're not educated enough, educate yourself, empower yourself. I did it. And if I did it and I have partnered with all these resources and been chosen one of the 100 powerful women in the Bronx, it's because I educate myself and empower myself how to conduct myself and help and listen to the voices of those that don't have a voice.
Love it. Words of wisdom. Love it. Chris K, over to you, sir. What's your thought that you want to leave folks with?
Yeah, I just want to back up the Reverend. For informal education, and if you read, you'll know as much as anybody who has a ton of formal education and PhDs from some of the top universities. So curiosity is actually the beginning of empathy, and I think that engagement is what I tell people. I tell people that in my own community. I tell people because actually, if you report, but the government doesn't care or doesn't know how to deal with these issues, then it stops. So what we need are engaged citizens of this country that will make this country live up to its best ideals. And without your involvement and your deep engagement in your own space, and you'll find it locally, it's okay. Start local, start right next to where you are. It's so powerful. You believe me, you won't believe it. It's so small. You do one little pebble and be engaged local level. It's hard. The federal government, it's kind of up there. Local government, responsive, right there. You can make a difference.
Love it. Thank you all for all the wisdom that you shared. Maya, I'm going to toss the virtual mic over to you for some final quick comments as we wrap up today.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, of course, to the panelists who participated in today's webinar, Chris Donahue, Reverend Carmen Hernandez, Ramona Carroll, and Chris Kwok. And thank you, Amy, for all the energy you bring in moderating these sessions. I hope that by way of this presentation, we have inspired you to join us on HACCEN. Get active on the listserv and continue this conversation that we had today there. Of course, if you are a victim or think you are a victim of a hate crime or incident, we encourage you to report it to local law enforcement. But we also hope that you will report your incidents on HACCEN. HACCEN's membership includes folks from the FBI like Amy and folks from the Department of Justice as well. So we won't have all the answers on how to combat hate crimes, but by sharing like we did today and on the HACCEN listserv going forward, perhaps we can find ways to bring down the level of incidents and to support one another as we navigate through these incidents that affect so many in so many ways. I also hope that you will join us for our next webinar, which will tackle the topic of hate crimes in special communities. Special communities are dear to my heart, and I'll share why during our next webinar. See you then. Thanks for coming.